I think we're set to go here. Um, and we are live in the Wild Geese virtual Shebean. And we're hanging out live today with you, the members of the Wild Geese community, as well as some of our friends and lovers of all things Irish who have not yet registered their own profiles at thewildgeese.com. And let me just take a second to encourage you to do that. If you haven't done that already, go ahead and register your own profile at thewildgeese.com. The benefits are many, and the drawbacks, well, I can't really think of any drawbacks, so go ahead and register. And let us know if you have any difficulty with registering your profile, and of course we'll be glad to help. And by the way, in case you're wondering what a Shebean is somewhat of an unlicensed drinking establishment, and Shebeans were more common in Ireland when poaching, or moonshine, as it might be called, was being manufactured deep in the hills of Connemara and other places around Ireland. But I imagine there are still a few Shebeans in operation around the country today. So we're joined tonight here where I am in Ireland, or today if you're in the U.S. or Canada, joined in the Shebean today by Master Irish Storyteller Jim Hawkins, who himself is a member of thewildgeese.com. Jim was born and raised in County Westmeath, Ireland, where he was influenced by the great Irish storyteller named Eamon Kelly, along with his uncle, whose name is Jack Fallon. And also with Jim is the executive producer of the Wild Geese, Jerry Regan, and they're joining. Hang on one second. I think my noises are annoying you guys. 1 second. I need to turn that off from the Wild Geese website. Where's my Wild Geese? Sorry guys, 1 sec. In any case, I can't find my Wild Geese window. Anyway, what was I saying? Ah, yes. Jim and Jerry are joining us from somewhere outside of New York City today. I think they'll maybe elaborate exactly where they are. My name is Ryan O'Rourke, and I'm coming to you from Connemara on yet another incredibly windy night here in County Galway. And for those of us joining us live today, we're encouraging you, as always, to submit your comments and questions through our multiple social network avenues, such as Facebook, Twitter, and of course from within the main chat room on thewildgeese.com. So, without any further rigmarole from me, I want to welcome into the Wild Geese virtual Shebean, Jim Hawkins. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you for having me. Just want to make one correction, Ryan. I wasn't born in Westmeath. I was born in New York City, a place called Astoria, Queens. So when I do performances, I always say that I'm a proud native New Yorker, but I was raised in Westmeath. My mother was from a small little village called Castletown, Gagan, which is about maybe 8 miles from Mullingar. And my father was from Ormore in the County Galway.
Okay. Yes. Well, but so you were not born in Westmeath, but you spent.
I was raised there from. Yeah. I was raised there from about 1.5 until I was 10.5, and of course, what happened when an awful lot of Irish came to New York in the 30s and 40s, and there was a great deal of Irish dance halls at that time. That was where the Irish met. They congregated, and that's how my parents met. And it's actually a very funny story how my parents met. My mother was actually dating my father's best friend, Mike O'Leary. And during the Second World War, Mike got inducted into the U.S. Army. And before he left, the last thing he said to my father was, he said, "Tom, take good care of Mary for me." Well, he did. And they were married in 1944. I was born in 1946. And in 1947, my father, I'm sure, Ryan, you probably know people like this. We all know them. My father had a passionate love for Ireland, for his own country. Probably never would have left if it wasn't for economic reasons. So in 1947, they went back to Castletown, Gagan, where my mom was from. My father, with the help of neighbors, built a house and intended to stay there for the rest of his life. But what happened was in the 50s, the last thing he was doing, he worked for the ESB. He was putting down the telephone poles. And then the money ran out.
Right.
And of course, as you know, an awful lot of the Irish used to go to England and Scotland. And my father was going to do that, but my mother always wanted to come back to America, and she said, we're going back to New York City. And so, you know how we all have certain memories that never leave us. Easter Saturday of 1956. Now, here's a kid who's been growing up in a farm in Westmead, no restrictions almost, and all of a sudden here, riding in a taxi cab, going up through New York City and looking at all of these buildings and thinking to myself, where in the name of God have they brought me, and when am I going home? It was one of my early thoughts. But so, as I said, you're a native-born New Yorker, but my parents from Westmeath and Galway. So.
Okay, well that's good to know. Now, Jim, I was looking at your website. Been looking at it several times over the last few days, and was looking at it again today. And by the way, that's JimHawkinsIrishStory.com for those of you who would like to visit that excellent website, JimHawkinsIrishStory.com. And I pulled a quote here that interested me, which I've found to be definitely true. And I'll just read what you said there from the website. You said, in our modern era, which when even the remotest parts of the Irish-speaking areas of Ireland, known as Gaeltachts, are being invaded by the media, unfortunately the storytelling tradition is fading. Elaborate on that for us, please.
Well, as I said, and actually it might be changing, Ryan. I made that quote, I guess it's quite a few years ago, but at that time, it seemed that you know, the oncoming of television and new media and so forth, that the storytelling was starting to be forgotten about. Originally, when people, you know, met to socialize in their homes, the storyteller was a central part of that celebration. And actually, an American sociologist, I'm not going to remember his name, but he went over to Ireland actually to investigate about the storytelling tradition. And he became so fascinated by what was happening, particularly in the west of Ireland, that he wrote a book called Their Likes Will Not Be Seen Again. And he talked about the fact that it seemed that particularly the storytelling tradition seemed to be fading. And of course, one of the very good things, I think, was recognized. The Dublin Folk Commission came along, and I think saw the same thing, and they started to go around the country and record the tellers and record the stories. But since that time, Ryan, just listening to things coming out of Ireland and so forth, it seemed, I guess it's another one of the influences of Riverdance, which I think is an amazing thing, what Riverdance has spawned, not just in the music, but in interest in other things, Irish as well, as the storytelling. It seems to be that more of the young people are picking up the stories. I haven't seen them. Maybe you know more about this. I heard there's a young fellow was on the television. It's about 16 years old and telling stories, and I believe an amazing storyteller. So it seems to me, which I think is a great thing, if the storytelling tradition seems to be coming back.
Hey Jim, here I am in a back room at Casa Hawkins here. We're actually in Baldwin, New York, on Long Island. Mm-hmm. I wanted to get you right into a story in the grand Irish tradition of storytelling. I think you mentioned you have a story about your childhood in Castle Gehagen.
Yeah. Actually, probably my first influence was my Uncle Jack Fallon, and as I said, I grew up around him. And Jack wasn't what we would call a trained storyteller. He just had this wonderful ability to be able to put together just everyday events in the community, and I was fascinated by this. He would put this narrative together, and it would flow, and he would bring in different people in the community. And I just always remember thinking, I was a child, gee, I hope I can do that someday. So this is a story that I've written myself, and it's actually part my Uncle Jack, really part my imagination, And as you'll hear, the end of the story actually is many times it's an ending you'll see in other cultures, and the story is called God and the Devil, or as they say in Ireland many times, the Devil. God and the Devil dividing the people. Across the fields from where I grew up as a child, in Castletowngagan in County Westmeath in the Midlands of Ireland, lived a man by the name of Joe Keaveney. He was affectionately known to all of us as the Rat. When you looked into his face, you understood why. Now, Joe wasn't a particularly liked person in our community. There were two main reasons. One, he was rarely in good humor. Many a time when my mother would send me down to the village on the bicycle for messages, at that time the bicycle was bigger than myself, and I might meet Joe coming along the road, and if it was a nice day, I might say to him, "Grand day, isn't it, Joe?" "What's so good about it?" was the answer that I got most of the time. The other reason he wasn't liked very much because, you see, he was very stingy, especially when it came to his apple orchard. So you see, Joe Keaveney had the finest apples that ever went down a man or woman's gullet. Don't you know the kind? And he would never make use of them himself, and he would never share them with anybody else. But justice will be done in these matters, and justice was done. For you see, living in the village of Castletowngagan at that time was two of what was known as the boyos. Don't you all know what a boyo is? A Dennis the Menace type. Now, the first of these boyos was a fellow by the name of Joe Carty. Give an idea of the kind that Joe was. You've all seen the dog with the long, sad face and the long ears. Well, that was Joe and my classmate. Now, when we were going to school, he was known as the jerker. The reason with that, at that time, the teachers could beat us with anything they want. A piece of a strap, a cane, a stick, anything at all. Now, Joe was the sort of lad, he rarely got beat. But on the odd time that he would have to go up and receive the slaps, he would put the hand out over the desk. And at the last minute, he would get so nervous that he would jerk the hand back, resulting in the teacher receiving the blow instead of Joe. Now, I don't know what I was after doing to him on this particular day. He sat on the seat right next to me, but he was just in the act of lashing out at me when this kid, my first teacher, a great one, with a rip on wheels, looked up and said, "Come up here this minute, Joe Carey." "But Miss Joe, I didn't do anything." "Come up here this minute, Joe Carey." Well, Joe went up to the front of the desk and she said, "Put out your hand." "But Miss Joe, I didn't do anything." "Put out your hand." Well, the hand went out over the desk. Now, on this occasion, Miss Joe decided not to get up from behind the desk to deliver the blows. A decision that she was to regret, I can tell you. She leaned back with all of her strength, and she came down, and at the last minute, Joe jerked the hand back. The stick hit the edge of the desk, flew up into the air in two pieces, one of which landed on Miss Joe's head. We all fell out of our desks in laughter, but she made us pay. Because she lined us all up against the back wall, and she gave us 5 shots on each hand. And there are days I think I can still feel them. The second of the boys was a fellow by the name of Billy McLaverty. Wee Willie, as we used to call him. Wee Willie was, and still is, no more than 4 feet 9 inches in height. And the last time I saw him in the village of Castletowngagan, he was sitting up in a stool having a pint of Guinness, and the legs still didn't reach the floor. Now, Billy was the sort of fella, if you got on his side, he got revenge. I remember my father telling me, I wasn't there myself, but whatever this farmer did to Billy, that one day Billy go up while the farmer was out of the house, and he took the door off the hinges. And then he took the donkey, or as we used to say, the ass. He took the ass and cart, and he backed it all the way into your man's living room and left it there. A fine thing to find in your house when you came back home. Now, I don't know what the Rat Keaveney did to Billy McLafferty, if he did anything at all. But one night, Billy decided that he was going to go up and steal all of the rat's apples. And he talked Joe Carty into going with him. The lads waited down by Billy's house till the rat passed down the road to the pub. He went out to the pub most nights. And when he passed down the road, the lads came out of the house, big shopping bags, up the road, into the rat's farm, into his orchard, up the trees. And a couple of hours later, there was hardly an apple left in it. Fleeced! The lads headed back to our village, a distance of about a mile, made more difficult, of course, by the weight of the apples. And when they got within the edge of our village, they decided that they would stop, rest themselves, and divide the apples in our graveyard. And one of the bags was so heavy, they left it at the gate, and they decided they would divide those on the way out. They went into the graveyard, the lovely moonlit night. Where else would you find yourself? Found themselves 2 comfortable gravestones, sat down, and started to divide the apples. That's mine. That's yours. That's mine. That's yours. That's mine. That's yours. Strange words to be coming from a graveyard at 12 o'clock at night, don't you think? So thought Johnny Ginnity, another one of the unusual lads in my village. Tell you a little something about Johnny. Now, Johnny didn't drink too much, but every now and then at the end of the week, after a hard week of work, he went into the pub for a few pints, and this particular night he must have had a few extra. Because when he came out, he was leaning up against the wall of the pub and trying to keep himself in some kind of contact with the floor. Well, when the eyes cleared up, who did he see approaching him but our parish priest, the PP, as we used to call him, Father McGahey, a man who hated drink in all forms. And when he saw Johnny up against the wall of the pub, he came up to him nose to nose, eyeball to eyeball. "Drunk again, Johnny?" "Aye, me too, Father," was his response. Now, Johnny also was a very nervous, anxious kind of a fellow, particularly when it came to graveyards. And you see, he lived near the graveyard in our village. So many a night he was on the way home, and he was by himself, and he was passing the graveyard and feeling a little bit nervous. He'd be singing a bit of a tune or humming a bit of a song to himself. So this night he's coming along. Dee-da-dee-da, da-ladle-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da, da-lodle-dum-daidle-dum-deedle-dee-da, dee-odle-dum-daddle-dee-doodle-dee-idle-dee-dum, and he hears, "That's mine. That's yours. That's mine. That's yours. That's mine. That's yours." "Oh, God," says Johnny, "it's the end of the world. God and the devil are down here in the graveyard dividing the people." Well, as fast as he could, he raced back down into my village, and he started to bang on doors in all directions. "Come out," says he, "it's the end of the world. God and the devil are down here in the graveyard dividing the people." Well, now, most people in my village, they knew the Johnny. They knew the sort that he was. They didn't pay too much attention to him. But don't you know how people are? Some people, the nosy and the curious. Some people in my village actually got up out of their beds at 12 o'clock at night, got dressed, and marched themselves all the way down to the graveyard and stood by the gate. And they heard, "That's mine. That's yours. That's mine. That's yours. That's mine. That's yours." And then there was a pause. And after a few moments, the voice of Billy McLafferty rose up once more. "Now, let's get down and divide the ones at the gate." Well, I can tell you, I can assure you, there was the sound of pounding footsteps heard all over my village that night, going in all directions, led by the voice of Johnny Gillikin saying, "Oh God, please do not divide me." Shine on shke. Thank you. And if
Nice
you go right now, at the end of a song, many times they say shine, meaning That's it. There is more,
Yeah.
no more, or shinny on scale. That's the story. So I
Nice.
understand that was
That one was called God and the Devil. Correct was the title of that
God and
one.
the devil dividing the people.
Okay, yeah, and that one was taken. That you heard that story from what I understand during your childhood in Westmeath. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. I
Very
have,
nice.
in fact, I have here, as I said, my Uncle Jack said it wasn't a train story. I don't know whether you can see this or not. Was just a
Raise
wonderful.
that up. Raise that up just a bit there, Jim.
Okay, how's that?
Yeah, yeah, that's better.
Yeah, he was a great kid. He was just a wonderful character. And I said he had this great ability. Ryan, you probably heard maybe it's not just Irish. Maybe it's I don't. They say many times if you're good at something, if you can sing a song or tell a story or whatever, they say you got the nya first. I don't
Right.
know where I originally heard that, but my Uncle Jack had the nya for telling stories. I mean, he was a night person. And I remember he'd be sitting on his lap and the pipe would be going, and he would just start to tell about local events. And I was fascinated how he could do it. And this, in case, since I mentioned, a picture of myself along with my parents. And I love the older pictures, right? The old black and whites.
Yeah.
And I'm very lucky. A couple of years ago, before my mom was moving out to live with us, I found drawers of all these old black and whites of us growing up in Ireland. So look, I was able to get them all and put them into albums and so forth. They
Nice.
really are precious. I'm just delighted to have them. So
There are a handful of really good photos on your website as well. I was noticing of yourself and an old family.
yeah, there's some there like my father's sister, Delia. She was from Clonmel, and there's some pictures on there of her and actually working on a story. Her husband's name was Morris. And I don't know if you know Clonmel, Ryan, fairly well. There's a hospital there as you come into the town. Come down that long, I think you hit Queen Street. But for many, many years, there was a house right at the entrance to the hospital, and they were the gatekeepers.
Huh.
And my Uncle Morris, another great character. He was known all over the town. He had this little white dog, and you'd see him. I remember he used to go over to Summers and rented a car, and he'd get me up in the morning, and I'd say to him, Morris, where are we going? Doesn't make a bit of difference, just drive. Well, we could go into any town within 20 miles, and I thought, wherever we walked into, a pub, a shop, or whatever you did, hello, Morris, great to see you again. So he was another one of those wonderful people in my childhood. So.
Hey, Jim, I did want to ask you if you ever got any feedback from Billy or the AKA or the Rat on the story. Did they ever hear you tell that?
No, he's not. Well, as I said,
version
the person it's based upon passed away a long, long time ago. So he wouldn't have heard it. As I said, the character that was based upon it. No.
And have you had a chance to perform in Castle Gahagan?
Have I had a chance to what?
Have you had a chance to perform in Castle?
No, not I. It was a suggestion I made to some people. In fact, I have a fellow storyteller. Her name is Kate Danaher, and we do a program called Stories by a Turf Fire, and basically what it is, the life and stories of the great Eamon Kelly, and made a suggestion possibly of doing it there, but no, it hasn't happened.
And Jim, you and I've known you for, when we were figuring it out, close to 40 years, going back to our days at the Irish Arts Center in Manhattan. And around that time, you were doing quite a bit of acting for the Irish Rebel Theater. Wasn't that what the Arts Center Theater was called back in the day?
Yeah, it was called the Irish Rebel Theater. Yeah, what started was actually I was doing a lot of acting here on Long Island, where I lived, and some in New York City. And then I found the center in I guess like 1975, and it was one of those situations where I had been away from things Irish for a while. I mean, like when we came back to America and I was 10 years old, I went to Irish dancing school and so forth. And then, but you know what happens? I wound up going to American schools and got interested in other things and so forth. But I always loved to sing. My mother had me sing a lot, and I used to sing, some of the Clancy Brothers songs and so forth. But then one night brought me to the Irish Arts Center, and I was thinking, just because I had been raised in Ireland, I knew an awful lot about it. And here I walk into this center, and there are people learning the instruments, dancing, doing sets, and putting out a magazine, running a theater, and that opened a whole new world to me, Jerry. That brought me into it, and that's when you were there about the same time. And I still tell you, one of the great times in my life. I was there from, I guess, about maybe 1975 through 1982.
Yeah, there was a lot of ferment going on at the Irish Arts Center. In that period, they were really inspired by this sense of socialism, where there was no charge for the classes. All you were expected to do was contribute to the cleanliness. Sometimes they had some people sweeping out rooms, going around handing out flyers.
Right.
I think it was called, Jim, in Irish, it was called me hall.
I'm sorry, it's called what?
The concept of labor, shared labor.
Basically, in Ireland, the idea of mehel.
Yes.
Of literally trading off. I mean, even like as a kid, for example, when the haying season came about, well, one day we might be at one farmer's and would do his hay, and then a couple of days later be at somebody else. Well, the same idea was at the Irish Arts Center. The philosophy of the center was that a culture should be free. Okay, people's culture would be free, and that was lived at the center. In a sense, if you walked in there and it didn't make any difference what part of the world you were from, if you walked in and there was a ceilidh going on, somebody literally took you by the hand, they brought you into it, and they would teach you the steps. And the same way with the language, the instruments. If you wanted to become part of it, and I said at the time, it was. Things were free. It was a wonderful philosophy. It was a wonderful idea. And then when you think of it, it's still true today. People's cultures, I think, should be free and should be able to, in other words, for any of us to experience them or learn something about them.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the Irish Arts Center was located, as it still is, in the
it's 553 West 51st Street. It's 51st Street, right on the corner, or just a little bit off 11th Avenue.
Yeah, it was it remains a 19th century building. It's certainly not getting any younger, and it was a building that I believe the city condemned and rented back to the center for, pardon the expression, a relative song.
Yeah, the original founder was actually Brian Heron. Brian Hearn was the grandson of James Connolly.
Yeah.
And Brian had a passionate love for many things, but particularly the Irish language. That it remained alive, and he also had a passionate feeling for the plight of Native Americans. So Brian and some other people that were involved. As I know it, maybe I said maybe not have the whole story correctly, but they got the building from the city, and of course refurbished it. And I believe now what's happened, they have gotten a grant. I think it's a combination grant from the Irish government and maybe money from this government as well. And I believe it's going to be expanded. Around the corner, I think, onto 11th Avenue.
Yeah, now that might give us a great segue, Jim, to another story that you had mentioned you would be able to present to us.
As I said, the Irish Arts Centre was just such a wonderful place for doing so many things, and I think the best thing they ever did was something called the Sheemsa. Now, the word Sheemsa in the Irish language technically means an amusement or an entertainment, and the Irish arts and the people, particularly Nye Heron, who was Brian's nephew, who was actually director of the center for many, many years, and a woman by the name of Laurie Bain, I think probably Alice O was as well. They were the ones who put together this Sheemsa, and they took the idea of it. Basically, Sheemsa also the idea of a gathering, of coming together to celebrate. And what they did is they wrote this production, a marvelous production, which told the history of the Irish people from pre-Christian times right up into the 1980s, in the time of Bobby Sands and the hunger strikers. And it was a marvelous production. It was done through music, singing, dancing, recitations, storytelling. And one of the things that happened in there is that there's a part of it where probably people know that when the British invaded Ireland, and of course an invader will always try to destroy a people's spirit. But one of the things that the British did was when they came to Ireland, they outlawed the language. And many times they came at it through the children in school. And when a child went to school and gave his name in the native Irish language, the English schoolmaster would say, no, no, that's not your name, we're going to give you an English form of the name. Well, one of the great writers of the world, I think, a man by the name of Brian O'Nolan or Brian O'Nolan, was a great satirist, wrote, among At Swim Two Birds is one of his books. Wrote a book called On Bail Bocht, which is the poor mouth. Also, Brian Ray, I'm not sure what newspaper it was in, but he wrote, it may have been in the Irish Independent, but he wrote under the pen name of Miles Nagopoline, where he wrote these articles, maybe a bit on a daily basis, and of course he made commentary on the social and political goings on. But part of that book was that he satirizes in this particular scene, this particular story, the British practice of forcing the English language on Irish kids. As that it's called the poor mouth. I was born in the parish of Barna, on the cold rocky shores of Western Ireland. Now, it was a funny kind of a place when I was growing up, because there was only two classes of people in it. The young, of which I was myself then, and the very old. There was hardly anyone in between, because the rest had gone off either to America for the money, or to Siberia to get away from our terrible climate. I remember I was 7 years old when I first went to school, wearing grey woolen breeches, but naked above and below. And I always remember that first day of school, each one of the children of the countryside with a sod of turf under his arm for the school fire. The schoolmaster's name was Osborne O'Lunasa. Oh, he was a tall, miserable man with grey skin and this teeth protruding through it. That man had a ferocity of anger on his forehead that was as permanent as the hair on his head. He didn't give a whit for anybody. We all went into the little schoolhouse, miserable little cabin with the waters running down the wall. The boys went in the boys' door, and the girls went in the girls' door, which struck me funny at the time, because when we got inside, we were all in the one room anyhow. We all sat in the seats while the master sifted us. And then he extended a long yellow finger in my direction and said, "What is your name?" I sat up and looked at him in confusion, having only sweet words of Irish as a means of protection and expression in the world. And then a voice from behind me said, "Cadasanum Dith, it's your name he wants." So I sat up proudly and I said, "Bonaparte, son of Michael. Bonaparte, son of Mary. Bonaparte, what?" The rabbit barked from the schoolmaster, and he beckoned me towards him. Well, by the time I got up to him, he had taken a huge oar, and with a swish of air, he dealt me a destructive blow on my skull. I fainted immediately, but not before I heard him saying, "Your name is James O'Donnell." James O'Donnell, James O'Donnell, James O'Donnell. Well, the words were still ringing in my ear when I came to, and when I got my vision back, there was another young lad standing in front of the schoolmaster. This poor lad lacked shrewdness completely, because when he was asked his name, didn't he give the Irish a common form just as I had? And he was struck by the air and sent flying through the air. Well, this went on all day, till every child in the place was beaten and told that his name was James O'Donnell. Well, that afternoon when I got home from school, my mother was making up a big pot of potatoes. I asked her for review. I sat there eating them with a bit of butter and a pinch of salt. Naturally, of course, I was disturbed by what had gone on at school that day, and I asked her about it. "Woman," says I've been told this day that everyone in the place is named James O'Donnell. And if that's the case, isn't O'Donnell a great name? And isn't James O'Donnell a great man for having so many children? "Oh, 'tis true enough," says my mother. "Well, if it's true enough," says I have no understanding of that same truth. She says, "Don't you know, it was the fate of the Gales. Your grandfather, the old grey fellow, it was his fate to be beaten on his first day and told that his name was James O'Donnell." "Well, if that's the case," says I'm through with education from this day forward." You're shrewd," says she, "for one so young." And that did end my formal education, and my Gaelic skull has remained unsplit ever since. But 7 years later, when I was 7 years older, an incident took place connected with my earlier education. My grandfather, the old grey fella, he was down in Cahersiveen one day, tasting spirits and chewing tobacco, and he heard a story going around that amazed him. But he didn't believe it at first, because you'd never believe the lies they'd tell you down in Cahersiveen. But anyhow, a couple of days later, wasn't he in the Dingle Peninsula, and the story was there as well. And about a fortnight later, he was up in Galway City, and they had it there too. At last, he believed it believingly, for you know they'd never tell you any lies in a big city. Well, that night he came home and he announced to the whole family, "God save all here, the English government is planning to pay £5 for every child that can speak English instead of this thieving Gaelic. And God bless them," says he, "for I don't think there'll be any happiness for the true Gaels as long as we're always living in little cabins in the glen, constantly fishing in the constant storms and saying stories at night as is our wont." "Oh, woe is me," says my mother. £5 a child, and me with only that dying example over there in the corner. "Well," said the old grey fella, "you'll have more children or you'll be without recourse." Well, now over the next fortnight a staunch gloom descended on the old grey fella. You could tell he was concerned with this lack of children. And about a fortnight afterwards, wasn't he down in the Dingle Peninsula again? And he heard a story going around that there was an English inspector going around, inspecting the children and listening for their words of English. Well, that night he arrived home, announced to the whole family, "God save all here, we'll have the house full of children by morning." "Oh, that's great," says my mother. "But I'm in no condition of that sort, and I never heard of that job being done overnight." "What about Sarah?" says he. "Sarah," says I in amazement at the mention of the pig's name. "Sarah," says he, "hasn't she a fine brood of children? And then aren't they always speaking in some foreign tongue? And for all we know, mightn't it as well be English?" "Oh, it's true enough," says my mother. Well, the very next day we had these lads living in the house with us. each of them in a little pair of grey woolen breeches. Now, I don't know the condition of the gales in the past, but I'll tell you what, we had these lads in the house. It was atrocious. The stench was overpowering. We waited for the inspector to come. He was a long time coming, but as the old grey fella always said, what will come, will come. And sure enough, on one cold, rainy, miserable day, we look out the window and we saw the inspector coming down the boring. Myself and the old grey fellow waited for him at the door. Me mother was in the back of the house cooing and talking to the pigs. The inspector only came as far as the door because of the stench that was emanating from within. How many? Said the inspector. 12, sir, said the old grey fella. Now, you could tell the inspector was very pleased with this mark of respect coming from an Irish peasant, he not knowing that the word sir in Irish means louse. 12, indeed. And every now and again, my mother would send a little pig running out into the middle of the floor on all fours, almost like a child on its hands and knees, and back in again. And then the inspector looked at me and extended his long yellow finger in my direction. What is your name? Very proudly he sat up and said, James O'Donnell, sir, says I. Well, this delighted the inspector. It allowed him to escape the stench and report back that he had inspected the children and found lovely words of English on them. About a fortnight later, big yellow envelope come full of lovely English money, which only goes to prove one of the old grey fella's favourite sayings. There's no hound unraceable. There's no cow unmilkable. And there's no money that can't be stolen. Sinead. On scale.
Very good.
Thank you,
very
thank
good.
you very much. Thank you.
Really enjoyed that.
I meant to say, before I started the story, Ryan, that tell your audience in the middle of it, a little bit of it, I guess you could say sounds disgusting, but of course, Brian O'Nolan was, his point was really to, satirize the activities of the British, particularly in relation to the people and forcing English on the Irish people. So.
Hey, you mentioned a bit ago your love for singing, so I wondered if we could just go right into
what? I'm sorry.
Your love for singing.
Oh yeah.
And I wonder if we could just go right into a song of your choosing here.
Sure. Let me get the bar on here as well.
What about The Liar, Jim?
I have a lot of
Liar.
I'm sorry, Jerry.
The Liar. I think that was a song you would.
Did you want to save it up till the end, or do you want me to do The Liar now?
Well, I think we're winding down.
Okay. All right. This is one of the more humorous songs in the Irish tradition. I think it was. I believe it was written by Tommy Macon, but it's one of my favorite songs. It's called The Liar. I was born about 10,000 years ago in Belmullet in the county of Mayo. It was me that chased the vermin when St. Patrick preached his sermon, and I'll whoop the man that says it isn't so. With me rifle toor-a-laddie, toor-a-lee. There is no one who can tell a lie like me. You can search until you tire, you won't find a bigger liar. Have been lying since the dawn of history. I saw Delilah cutting Samson's hair. Well, she cut away until his head was bare. When he didn't run away, well, she married him next day, and they opened up a barber shop in Clare. With me rightful toor-a-laddie, toor-a-lee. There is no one who can tell a lie like me. You can search until you tire, you won't find a bigger liar. Have been lying since the dawn of history. With King Billy at the point, I heard him call on his followers to follow till they fall. Then he said we'll win quite easily, and we'll canonize young Paisley. And he up and sang a verse of Derry's War. It was during World War II I met them all. There was Roosevelt, Churchill and de Gaulle, and one day I nearly fainted. I was having my house painted. There was Hitler hanging paper in the hall, with me rightful toorality toorally. There is no one who can tell a lie like me. You can search until you tire, you won't find a bigger liar. Have been lying since the dawn of history. You can search until you tire, you won't find a bigger liar. Have been lying since the dawn of history. Ho!
Nice.
And that's
Bravo.
Very good.
Now,
Very
just
good,
to tell you something, I read this a couple of months ago, right? I didn't know whether it's true or not. Somebody said Tommy Macon was motivated to to write that song the first time he heard Dick Cheney give a speech. Now, whether it's true or not, I don't know. I got a feeling he might be a liar, but anyhow,
Yeah.
whoever made it up, I think it's a great explanation anyway.
Appropriate enough. Yes, appropriate enough.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, we sure want to thank you for joining us here in the Wild Geese Virtual Shebeen today, and thank you for your time and
Thank
sorry.
you very, very much for thank you for having me. That's great.
Absolutely.
To chat with me. And of course, even though I grew up in Westmead and I love Westmead, my favorite parts of Ireland I love from Galway up through Mayo and into Donegal. So I really appreciate you having me. It was great.
Absolutely, and folks, if you want to check out more about Jim and his craft, and it really is an art form, the art of Irish storytelling, be sure to go to his website, which again is tell us the website address again, Jim.
It's Jim Hawkins irishstory.com.
Okay, great. And there is some more excellent information on there in terms of the tradition and what Jim does, and he does travel and do shows and appearances and things like that. So if that's something you'd like to have Jim do, by all means get a hold of him, and I'm sure he'll be glad to talk to you about doing that. So we'll wrap it up there for this evening. Thanks, Jerry, and thanks everyone for joining us in the Shebeen tonight. And until next time, we'll bid you a fond farewell, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, Ryan. Okay.
Mwah.
Thank you, Jim.
All right. Thank you for having me.